This is Brett Rademacher. I'm with Harold Smith, and we're doing our discussion on the article Book of Life, which is part of our scriptural, or Harold's Scriptural Salvation series, but it's part of our discussions. And what we do here is we just have more of an interactive discourse relating to some of the concepts that are discussed in the articles, and it helps really give a little more clarity to what's being taught. And also, it'll challenge you to get in there, dig deeper with some of the links that are connected to the article. There'll be additional teachings or scripts or verses, or sometimes there's supplementary things, PDFs, or key words being referenced and the Greek or Hebrew meaning, root meaning. So those all help these teachings work together collectively to make this more understandable. And so with that, we're starting out with the Book of Life teaching or discussion today. So good morning, Harold, or afternoon for you.
One comment I want to make before we get started. I've had several people approach me about whether or not, or what course they can take to learn Hebrew, because they feel like that they need to learn Hebrew to get involved with these concepts. And to most of those folks, I want to make it, I try to make it clear that, you know, I know just enough Hebrew to be able to get down the streets of Jerusalem without getting arrested. You know, they have courses in Israel. They call them Opine courses, and you know, I enrolled in one of those, but I saw that I wasn't going to be able to stick to their program, and so I opted out. And I was fortunate in being in Israel. I could converse with other Hebrews that, you know, helped me in the language, and I developed enough Hebrew to be conversational. But all of this stuff that you see in the articles where it's linking to Hebrew words or Greek words, what I've discovered is you don't have to have a comprehensive understanding of the language of Hebrew. You know, if you just use what we have available, you know, the Strong's is a good concordance for finding out what these words mean. You have to set aside their predisposed doctrinal theology about the Trinity and that Jesus is God. You know, if you can get beyond all of that, they can give you a pretty good idea of what these words mean. There are other sources available on the internet, and I'm not talking about people's commentaries. I'm just talking about you know, like a good Hebrew lexicon or dictionary, or you know, something of that nature that can help you get involved with the words themselves.
And you know, one of the things I want to point out is you do a very good teaching within the articles themselves, because the links that you point to, whether it's a Bible verse or a Greek word or a Hebrew root, those are the tools you are actually using. So those pieces are all connected within the article. So it's layered within there. So if somebody is just reading the article and they click on the reference, say to a Greek explanation or a Hebraic explanation of a word, they can see what you're using to define the meanings. And so it's really right in there within the articles if they just dive in and click some links.
And those are all free sources.
Yep. And it's interactive. It's embedded in the articles, so it's a process that you can do. You know, you can superficially read the article, but to really get into the meat of it, you click the links for either the Bible verse or the root meaning of a word from a Greek or Hebraic perspective. And then you also have some other dynamic links that might go to a PDF that gets into some background, you do with replacement theology and my big fat Greek mindset. Those are some things. And then you reference some external sources. And then also every article typically has links to other articles when you're talking about a concept that's more detailed, needs a lot more understanding. You can kind of get lost in that thread. I know from personal experience, because you can go from one to one article and they can kind of ping pong. So you have to be a little bit restrained in staying within the vein of thought of the existing article. But it is foundational stuff that you're building on that connects with the other ones. You just can't get away from that. So the links are there for that. So anything else before we get going?
And it's important, to follow those links.
Yes.
And it is important, to stay focused on what you got at hand before you get lost in the forest.
Yeah. Very good. Okay, so we're gonna talk today about what the Book of Life, right?
Right.
The Book of Life. So I guess the best question to start out with is, what is the Book of Life?
Well, there's a lot of different ideas being floated out there on what it is. Most people talk about the Book of Life of it's Yeshua's Book of Life. But that's really not the case. The first instance of a book in which names are retained or blotted out is found in Exodus 32:33. And what the words mean is what we need to pay attention to. And the Hebrew word translated book is sefer or cipher, the root word of which is sephar. And that Hebrew word actually means take account of, to reckon. And there's several points here to examine. First of all, like I said, it's not the Lamb's Book of Life. It is Yahweh's reckoning. And secondly, there's no mention of when or how names are added or subtracted, only that Yahweh has an accounting and he reserves the right to blot out the names of those who sin against him.
So what do you mean by Yahweh's reckoning? What does that mean?
Well, the sin of the garden was not that Adam and Eve physically took a bite of whatever piece of fruit there was. The sin was that Adam got it in his heart to determine for himself what was good and what was not. When we are in Yahweh's kingdom, there are promises he gives to us, provision. Those Israelites, even though they had disobeyed him and incurred his displeasure, so that they walked for 40 years in the wilderness, he still took care of them. And he gave them sustenance. The clothes that they wore never wore out. Their shoes didn't wear out. And so when we are in his kingdom, there are promises that are given to us. But if we disobey those, there's this separation that occurs from his ichad. And what I've come to see in my research of the Book of Life is that I haven't found where names are added to the book of life. What I've come to understand is that as we walk in his spirit, and the way he prescribes it, we adhere to his protocols. We become life. We become human. We become who he is. And
now, you made a statement that before you go expound and go too far along. You made a statement just a minute ago about when Adam ate of the fruit, and the real sin was he was determining what was right or wrong, right? He was making a determination that he was the final judge, or he was the God of his own life. And so rather than listening to what he was told, he was deciding what was right or wrong, right? Or is that wrong?
He was tempted, and at first he understood the temptation and recoiled from it, but at the behest of Eve, he decided, okay, this might be pretty good after all. And
so we have a life principle here. The woman is always at fault. Is that right?
Oh, no.
Blame it on the woman. I'm just kidding. I just wanted to get all the women riled up for 5 seconds. That's not at all the concept.
No.
So
they were both culpable.
Absolutely. But what I want to point out is that this determining what is right or wrong, it's a daily thing. It's like every day, everybody is challenged with this concept. Are you going to do what you think is right or wrong? Are you God of your own life? Are you the judge, or are you not? Is there a higher power, a creator, an entity, for those people that might not be believers? Is there somebody else that has a higher protocol for your life that you need to live under, or are you the one that decides?
And if we become that decider, we separate ourselves from Echad with the Father, that intimate relationship where we partake in the shared image of Yahweh.
But most people have no idea that's even possible. Most people don't even think you can hear from God. Most people don't realize, most people don't even believe in God, let alone that you could hear from him, and let alone that you could have an ongoing relationship with him, that you're walking under his guidance, his instructions, his laws. That they can't even fathom the possibility of that.
It runs even deeper. We become partakers in his divinity. We become as he is,
because why? Because we were created for that, or because it's something magical that happens because we're special? What?
No, it happens because we attend to his 10 words.
Now, for those that don't know, those 10 words are?
They're in common vernacular, they're known as the 10 Commandments.
The 10 Commandments. Yes.
And they're found in Exodus 20, verses 1 through 17. I call them the 10 words because in verse 1, it states very emphatically, these are the words of Yahweh. They're not commandments. Commandments is something that my father would say, if you don't do this, I'm going to blister your butt. And that's not what he's talking about. The Yahweh is not a person of help me here. What's the word I'm looking for? He's not a person of vindictiveness. He's not this overbearing. Yeah.
But there are blessings and there are curses associated with this, with these 10 words.
the blessing is if you are keeping his 10 words, those 10 words will keep you out of the briar patch. If you're not being attentive to his words, your own self-determination is eventually will lead you into a briar patch.
Okay,
so I want to rephrase it. It's not that there are curses, there are consequences.
Okay, so it would be like, for example, let's say you had a fence around your yard for your kids, and they had their playground in the backyard, and as long as they stayed in that playground area of the backyard, everything's good. But if they climbed the fence and, ran out into the middle of the street, and you live not too far from a busy street, got run over by a car, that kind of thing.
I would clarify that illustration to say that in that fence, there are 10 gates, and you're responsible to keep those gates closed.
Gotcha.
And if you open one of those gates, you're going to allow stuff to come in that doesn't belong there and normally wouldn't exist there.
So first of all, you have to know there are 10 gates. Second of all, you have to know there's consequences for keeping those gates closed and and open. There's good and bad consequences for keeping them. And then you have to know exactly how those gates, what they mean, how they operate, because there's some consequences to not knowing, being ignorant. There's still consequences, regardless if you're aware of them. Would you agree with that?
Well, those consequences are called life.
Right.
And what you're doing is you're exposing yourself to all of the consequential nature of, if there was a time in my life when I did drugs. And while I was doing drugs, boy, they were great. I thought they were the greatest thing on earth. I'm paying for that now. There are consequences to doing that kind of, anything you involve yourself with, there are consequences that ultimately you're going to pay. Some people escape and they don't get scathed, but most people pay the consequence, for everything they do at some point in their life.
But what's so unique about these 10 words is these were directly given by the Creator to man.
They're the only 10 words that were given by Spirit to men.
What do you mean by Spirit? We're talking. What does that mean? What do you mean?
Yeshua said that if we are to worship the Father, to give ourselves to the Father, that He is looking for those who will worship Him both in spirit and in truth, not sacrificing one for the other.
Now, what does that mean, spirit and truth? I mean, people are going to listen to this and maybe not have a reference point for what that means.
The scripture says that Yahweh is spirit. And He is...
now, when you say spirit, is that like just an entity that lives in an invisible realm? What does that mean?
Well, He's not invisible. I mean, you can look around you every time you step outside your door and see Him. He's, He created everything, and so His Spirit is involved.
His handiwork is very visible.
Right.
But when He had this encounter with Moses, there was a tangible presence to Him.
It was light, and if you can think of the most brilliant, purest form of light that you can, that's who He is. We're told in 1 John 5 that Yahweh is light, and as the source of life, He is light. When Moses asked Him to show Moses His glory in Exodus 33, the end of the chapter 33, in Exodus 34, He did. And the first thing he did was he put down the essence of his nature, of that glory, on tablets of stone. Those were the 10 words. And then the next thing he did was he took Moses and he put him in the cleft of a rock and passed by him. He put him in a cleft so that he wouldn't see all of him all at once, because he is a consuming fire. That light is a consuming fire. And if Moses were to have seen all of him all at once, he would have been extinguished. He just in a puff of smoke. But as it is, Yahweh passed by him, and the scripture says that Moses saw a glimpse of his back. Now, if he has a back, he's got to have a front, right?
Maybe the front is more brilliant than the back?
Well, what Moses saw just in that glimpse of his back turned his hair white.
It lit him up.
It lit him up, and so that when he appeared before the Israelites, the scripture says that he was just aglow. And that glow was so fierce that many of them couldn't they couldn't look at him. He was brilliant because he'd
been in the presence of light and life.
Exactly.
So this book of life, could it be something more?
In what regard?
Well, in regards to, like, for example, Moses was in the presence of Yahweh, right? He was there, and this light and life obviously transferred to him, right? So could there be something more to this book of life than just your name being in it?
Yeah, because you have to remember that after the separation from Echad with the Father in the garden, all of those Hebrews in what's known as the Old Testament, in Hebrew it's called the Tanakh, all of those Hebrews, they all were in the presence of the Father in one way or another, but it was all external. What happened on Yom Shavuot, or what's known as Pentecost, was with the resurrection of Yeshua, there was a portal opened up whereby this spirit, this brilliance, now becomes part of us within.
Everybody? Everybody?
No, to those who keep his words, because what was previously written on tablets of stone now become written on our heart if we obey those words. If we embrace what those words say and mean.
What if somebody doesn't embrace them unknowingly, or what if they're only doing part of them?
They're keeping a gate open. And most people, if they keep one gate open, they're going to have 3 or 4 open, and they expose themselves to the consequences of the world.
So people would perish for lack of knowledge?
Okay, we need to make a distinction here about what kind of people we're talking about.
Yeah, exactly.
If you're talking about Homo sapiens all over the world, we're not talking about them. They're dead already.
Okay, before we go there, let's clarify something that a lot of people might have confusion on. Is the Christian version of salvation, is that the same as having your name written in the book of life?
No.
It's not? That's what they tell us in church.
I know, and you get a gate pass to heaven, which doesn't exist.
It doesn't?
No.
You're a party pooper. Okay, so
how do I know that it doesn't exist? We're given a clear. This was pointed out to me in an email a woman wrote earlier this week, that there is a clear reference to what happens to somebody when they die, and they don't go to heaven, because when Yeshua showed up after Lazarus had died, he didn't call him back out of heaven. He called him out of the grave. He didn't go anywhere. He was dead.
And dead means what?
Dead.
Dead means dead?
It means no life.
Like not existing?
No life.
Like not existing?
Like not existing.
Okay. Well, that kind of sucks.
When Yeshua was in the grave for 3 days, he didn't go anywhere. He was dead. Had no life. Had no life in him. It was Yahovah, we're told in Romans 8, Yahovah raised him from the dead. He didn't raise himself. If Yahovah had not raised him, he'd still be there.
So he was dead as in not existing.
Mm-hmm.
And then he was raised back to life from the dead.
Mm-hmm. I believe that the Father breathed life into him, the same as he had done when he formed Adam. And that's what makes him the second son. There's only two places in Scripture where it says that Spirit breathed upon men. The first was in Adam, and the second, what?
No, go. And
the second was when the first thing Yeshua did when he was resurrected, he had now become Spirit in the same fashion that the Father was Spirit. He appeared to the 11 in this room, and he said shalom. And then the Scripture says the first thing he did was he breathed into them. He breathed life into them. That was a precursor of what was to come on Yom Shavuot, or the day of Pentecost, when the breath of life came in like a mighty wind and breathed on those 120.
So this life, what is this life that was breathed into him, and is that associated with the book of life in any way?
Because, as I said, all of those Hebrews in the Tanakh, all of their association with the Father was external. What happened with that breath of life was the same breath of life that was breathed into Yeshua and breathed into Adam is now breathed into us. If is a big little word, if we keep the words of the Father by embracing the life that Yeshua exampled before us.
So is this life something that can come and go? Meaning it can be there if you're walking on this path and leave you if you're not? And what if you're not nailing it 100%?
You know, there are only 10 words. And we're told that in James that they're not hard to keep. They're not hard to keep. They're pretty simple. And the Father's not going to give us something we're not capable or able to do.
Yeah, but the Christian perspective is we can't do it. We're not capable, and that's why Jesus came, because nobody could do it.
Well, that's a lie.
That's a lie?
Mm-hmm.
Why is that a lie?
Because we are capable to do it.
Nah.
Huh?
Nah. I've been to church. They said we're not. That's why Jesus came.
And so that's a lie.
That's a lie. And then we just live under grace because he did it for us and we don't have to do it. So now we got this super past grace, and all we got to do is raise our hand and come up to the altar, and during an emotional appeal, say, the sinner's prayer, and then I get the golden ticket and I'm in like Flynn. What?
It's all a lie.
No way, it's church. They don't lie in church.
I'm sorry, they lie all the time in church. Now, it is an expertly fabricated lie, and it's one that...
How could so many good-intentioned people be lying?
You know, you you've heard the expression about, the highway to Hades is lined with good intentions.
Well, okay, so let me ask this. So if my name is in the book of life and it hasn't been blotted out, that means I get to go to heaven. But if it's not, if it's blotted out, I go to hell, right?
No.
No.
There is no heaven and there is no hell. According to Scripture, I'm not talking about man's theology, philosophy, or any of that. I'm talking about the words of Scripture.
You're either making some crazy old man claims or you're onto something.
Yeah, I am. My son tells me that all the time. Okay, well, we have to define these terms.
Yep.
And so, heaven. How does Scripture define heaven? Heaven is defined where Yahweh's throne is. Heaven is his throne, and earth is his footstool. Right?
Right.
Yeshua even reinforced that fact. He quoted that verse. So then we have to look at Yahweh, who sits on this throne. We're told in several places in the Tanakh that with Yahweh, there is no beginning and there is no end. Now, time is a man-made measurement. The definition of time is the distance between the starting of one event and the ending of that event. But if you have no beginning and you have no ending, there is no time. There is no time in eternity because that's where Yahweh abides, where Scripture tells us. He abides in eternity. So there is no time there. He is preeminent all the time. He's right here. So on that day, on Yom Shavuot, on Pentecost, what happened was he changed his residency. He changed his abode from the heavenlies, from the external, wherever he was in the external, to within, to those within those who embrace his words who follow his words by embracing the words of embracing the life of Yeshua as their own. Yeshua said in John 14:23-24, he said, if you keep my words, I will come and abide in you, and the Father will come and abide in you. And the words that I speak are not mine, but my Father's.
How could they both abide in you?
Because they are Echad. This is the mystery of Echad. It's what began with Adam when the Father breathed that life into him. He became as the Father. And it's the same thing happened with Yeshua when he was breathed upon. He became as the Father. And what he has done, having opened that portal to restore and reclaim Echad with the Father, he could have kept it for himself, but he didn't. He said, and he prayed in John 17:3, he says, Father, I pray for these 12, and then further down in verse 21, he said, I pray on all of those who would believe on what the 12 words are, that they become Echad with me, just as, in similar fashion, in like manner, that I am Echad with you.
So
that they become Echad.
So when that happens, is that when you come into the book of life? I know we talked about it. You know, it looked more like people were in the book of life and they could be blotted out. But if they're not following the 10 words and they don't have that life in them, and then say start following those 10 words and that life is in them, is that when they become, is that when they're in the book of life? Is it something they can move in and out of?
Well, yeah, to an extent. I mean, I've moved in and out of it all my life, because I wasn't too smart, and I didn't really understand.
I think people can relate. I think people that have walked on this path can relate to this, to knowing the difference to when they're on the path and they're walking it. Maybe not fully understanding the ramifications of the 10 words, but knowing when they're there and when they're not there. So what I'm curious about is, in this book of life, how are people assured they're in the book of life, or how do they know when they're in it or not? Is there a way to know, or is it like throwing a dart?
No,
maybe.
No, the definitive.
How?
When they keep the 10 words.
Okay, but what if they're keeping the 10 words the majority of your life, and like the last 3 months before they croak, they fall off the wagon?
I'm not going to extrapolate myself into the place of the Father to make those kind of determinations, but I believe this is what Paul was talking about, the Hebrew apostle Shaul, when he said that I finished the race. I have kept his words. I have kept what he has shown me in the life of Yeshua. I have,
Okay, I got that. But let me ask you this. So is there a separation of obedience of people? Like, for example, this concept of having a nation of priests, right? There was a separation. Are we living in a process where there's a life lived determines a life of eternity based on this walk within the 10 words? Is there some kind of placement that occurs afterwards based on people's embracing of this in this physical realm now? That's a deep question, I know. For people not new to scripture or anything, that might be like way ahead of where their understanding is. But if people are called to be kings and priests through Christ, right?
People aren't called to be priests. People are called to become adopted into the kingdom of the Father.
Okay.
And as they abide in the kingdom of the Father, by keeping his 10 words, they become priests.
Okay. So let me ask you this. So how does that, let's say they do this. Let's say they understand this. They start walking in it. They start living it. They start manifesting this life. And what does that translate into after they're dead?
It doesn't translate into anything. Their names are in the book of life. So
what does that mean?
On the day of judgment, when and there's only one coming in Scripture, and that's the day of Yahweh. When that day occurs, the Scripture tells us that that he will open the book of life, and those whose names are not in it will be extinguished.
Now, what does that mean?
That means they'll be thrown into fire and burn up.
Like it's a one-off? It's not a forever torment.
No, it's not eternal.
The eternal is that they don't exist anymore.
Exactly. And to be accurate, if their names are not in the book of life, they don't exist anyway. So
that, what is, okay, whoa, okay, slow down the boat. What?
If their names are not in the book of life, they're dead anyway.
Dead in what sense? Because obviously they're walking, huh?
They have no life in them.
They have no life in them. So this is a perspective: is if you have no life in you, as you were intended to, as you were originally created to have, you are dead, right? Yeshua said, "Let the dead bury the dead." That was kind of a concept he was relating there in that statement, right?
Right.
But then also, we had this discussion a little while ago. Is it even goes beyond that? Not only are they dead, they not considered human. There is a differentiation between, being a
Homo sapien and being human. Yes.
That's crazy.
Well, now that you think about it, I mean, people ask me.
No. Once you start thinking about it, it makes some sense. But that's you throw that out in the middle of a group of people at a table, and you're gonna, at the very least, you're gonna fry some brains just pondering that.
You're gonna get them pretty mad at you. Is what happens.
Not necessarily. You can be nice about it.
No, I mean, I'm nice about it, but their response is going to be.
I don't know. I mean, some of them might get cross-eyed, confused. Some of them might get it. So, everybody's different.
People ask me what happens, like you did earlier, what happens after you die? And my response is, what happens to a dog after he dies?
All dogs go to heaven. We all know that.
Okay, what happens to a moose when he dies?
Usually, well, if you're doing it right, you're going to eat it.
Okay, so I mean, when we consider that heaven is God's throne and God's throne is within those who embrace His life, animals don't have that choice.
Right.
Insects don't have that choice. When the bug smacks on the windshield of my car, he's dead. Okay? And it's the same thing that happens to Homo sapiens. Only with Homo sapiens, I mean, in the same way that animals walk around and, for all intents and purposes, they're dead, so do Homo sapiens.
I think what I want to point out here before we continue on, a few more things to cover. There's a lot bigger transition from this state of death that people are naturally into this being of life and being one with the Father than people realize. It's much more mind-blowing. People don't really realize the state they're in and the significance of that state and the importance of transitioning out of that state into being what they were truly created to be, and the repercussions of that not happening. People don't really get that. More so Christians, because Christians have a little bit of information, but they're not getting the full package.
I don't even think they're getting a little bit of information.
Well, they're getting a little bit.
I don't think so. There's no difference. There's no difference in any man-made religion. There's no difference in the man-made religion of Christianity and the man-made religion of Islam. All of those Islamists believe they're going to heaven. Every one of them.
Well, you got to blow some people up first.
That's another issue. They all believe they're going.
That's a bad joke. So
they're all believing they're going to heaven, to a place called heaven.
Right.
And so what differentiates those two groups of people, other than their man-made traditions that they hold and are passed down over centuries?
Okay, so David said that the only people whose names are in the book of life would gain the kingdom.
are those that gain the kingdom, right?
And what do you mean by gain the kingdom? So what does it mean to gain entry to the kingdom?
Well,
so there's a statement. What does it mean to gain entry to the kingdom of Jehovah at his appearing? What does that mean?
If you're waiting around for Jehovah's appearance to figure out how to get entry into the kingdom, it's too late.
Okay.
Would
that be a weeping and gnashing of teeth moment?
Pretty much. But you know, that's the parable of the 10 virgins. And notice that in that parable, they were all virgins. There were 5 that were left out.
Right.
Because they weren't prepared.
Right.
What prepared the 5 to get in was they carried extra oil in their lamp. And all through the Tanakh, you'll find the words of Yahweh, those 10 words referred to as oil and honey and, you know, stuff that
basically what that means is they were following the 10 words.
Exactly.
Really?
Mm-hmm. And those that weren't, when they discovered that their light had gone out, immediately they went out to try to buy their way into heaven or into the kingdom, and it was too late. Because
so to become in Revelations, to become a part of this kingdom, you need to be an overcomer. To keep your name in the book of life, you need to be an overcomer, right?
Yeah. So overcome what?
Yeah. Well, what does it mean to be an overcomer? How do I become an overcomer?
It means that when I'm sitting here and I'm destitute and I'm broke, and although I believe that if you're really in the kingdom, you won't get to that place. But let's just say I'm driving down the highway and I have a flat tire. So I get out to change the tire and I open up the trunk and the tire's flat from when I had it before and I never got it fixed. So I have the opportunity to rail and cuss and you know, get all out of sorts and start blaming the Father for my condition, or I can just remain in shalom, thank the Father for taking care of me, and wait until he does that. And you know, whenever I'm in those kind of situations, my first tendency is, like anybody else has, to give over to my flesh and just and be disconcerted and discombobulated. But if I remain in His Spirit and just start worshiping Him by my actions, because what we give ourselves to is what we serve, and what we serve is what we worship. That's both in Matthew and in Deuteronomy. I can wait on the Father, and He will show up to take care of me, even though it was my fault, even though I should have taken care of business before. Now that's the part where grace enters in. You see, Christians think that grace originated with the New Testament, but when you look at the nature of the Father, we talked earlier about how in Exodus 33 Moses said to show me your glory in Exodus, and then in Exodus 34 the Father did. When you get to Exodus 34 3-7, it says what His glory is. It says that He passed before Moses and He proclaimed, the Lord good and first thing he said, good in graciousness. And it lists a bunch of them, long-suffering and loving kindness. When we begin to understand that grace is a nature, part of the nature of the Father, then we can look back into the Old Testament and we can see that when the Israelites were crying out from their bondage in Egypt, it says that the Father heard their cry and he remembered his promise to Abraham and he rescued them out of that bondage. That was the exercise of grace. Those Israelites didn't do anything to earn that. That was part of the nature of Yahweh. And in my situation on the side of the road with two flat tires, if I just continue to abide in his presence, in what he's been showing me in his words, I can expect the Father to come to my rescue the same way he did those Israelites. It can be argued that the reason that they were there to begin with was because they fled Israel because there was a famine in the land. And so, it can be argued that they got there out of fear, which isn't part of the nature of Yahweh. But even though he still rescued them, even though they were in the wilderness for 40 years as a result of his displeasure, he still took care of them. That's part of the provision of living in his presence. And that's what it means to live in life. And, whether that grace comes supernaturally or he sends somebody to stop to, that just so happens to have a tire that, fits my car. However that works out, if we just trust him to keep his promises to us, he will.
Okay, so I've got a question. It says in Revelations 21:27. So I got two more pieces to cover before we finish up. We're running a little bit long. But nothing, this is 21:27 Revelation, but nothing unclean will ever enter it, nor anyone who does what is detestable or false, but those who are written in the Lamb's book of life. It's referring to entering into the kingdom, right?
Correct.
And when so this entering, now so, it says nothing unclean will enter it, nor anyone who does what is detestable or false. So everybody has done something that's detestable or false or something unclean. So is this book of life something more dynamic? Meaning, is it like, because there's another thing you say here, it says a more literal rendering would be the book of the life of the Lamb that is now written on the hearts of those who embrace Yeshua's life. So is this life something, this book of life, is it something a little more dynamic in that it's something people can move in and out of based on their actions or behavior?
The short answer is yes.
Okay.
But the more,
meaning, is the book of life similar to this oneness?
The book of life, we become the book of life.
Okay.
It's what it says. And I want to distinguish about this moving in and out of that you're talking about. Even though I'm in the kingdom, I may make mistakes.
Right.
But we're told in 1 John that if we confess our mistakes to one another, he is faithful and just to forgive us and to put us back into that place of right standing with him. So I'm the part we're talking about, the moving out of the kingdom,
is not necessarily the book of life.
No, the book of life. Those that move out of the book of life are those who have determined, here we get back to that word again, determined to do some other things. And
basically, they've hardened their heart, and it's basically a rebellion, or said, I don't want anything to do with this.
I wouldn't even go so far as that to say that. I would just say that they excuse it.
They what?
They excuse it.
What do you mean?
Well, they set up these traditions, or they embrace these traditions of man above and to the exclusion of the 10 words of the Father. You have to remember.
That's like every Christian church does.
Yeah. You have to remember that the harshest words Yeshua ever spoke to anybody were of the religious Pharisees of his day. Because what they did was they were always looking for ways to skirt what his words said and actually meant. And then they would make these traditions that they would hand down. And over time, those traditions then would actually take precedence over his words. The only thing Yeshua ever pointed to that would bring to none effect the words of Yahweh are the traditions of men. You find that in Mark 7:13. That's the only thing he ever said. So the only way we can bring to nullify the words of Yahweh within us is to start adhering to the traditions of men. And the definition of tradition means to turn over, to forfeit your free will and choice to somebody else's thoughts and behaviors.
Very good. Okay, so with that, I think we've done a pretty good job covering this topic. How about you?
I think so. There's a lot unsaid, but if people will keep coming back and listening to these things over time, I think we will get through it all.
Yeah, absolutely. You can only say so much in about an hour. So. All right, very good. All right, it's a wrap.